Right now, as you watch this, the price of everything you buy, your gas, your groceries, your heating, is climbing because one-fifth of the world's oil supply has been cut off, and the country responsible for that crisis didn't ask for help. It didn't negotiate. It issued a demand, backed by a threat, directed at every allied nation that hasn't fallen in line. Let that sink in. And while that threat was being delivered from aboard Air Force One, Canada's Prime Minister was doing something completely different. Last week, Mark Carney stood on a frozen NATO base alongside the German Chancellor. This weekend, he sat with 5 Nordic leaders in Oslo. Monday morning, he walked into 10 Downing Street with the British Prime Minister. 3 stops, 3 sets of allies, one consistent message at every single one. Canada stands with its partners. Canada does not take orders. And then, one by one, every ally Carney had just met with turned to Washington and said no. Not one country complied, not one. This has been confirmed by Reuters, the Associated Press, CNN, the BBC, and the Financial Times. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what each country said, why one response is being described as the most damaging public rejection of an American president in NATO history, and what Canada was quietly building while it all played out. Here is how we got here. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched military operations against Iran. No ally was consulted, no coalition was assembled, no plan was shared with anyone. Within days, Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that carries roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. 1,000 tankers stranded. In the last 24 hours before this was recorded, 0 vessels made it through. 0, down from 60 per day. That is not a disruption. That is not a slowdown. That is a complete shutdown. Oil surged past $100 a barrel. And instead of accepting responsibility for a decision made alone, the United States turned to the very allies it never consulted and demanded they send their navies to fix it. A social media post called on China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and others to deploy warships. Then came the warning: if allies don't respond, it will be very bad for the future of NATO. Think about what that means. The country that launched operations without informing a single partner is now threatening those same partners for not volunteering their militaries to deal with the fallout. With what plan to reopen the strait? According to U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, none. With what prior consultation? None. With what justification for the demand? That is exactly the question every Allied capital asked this week. And they answered it. Out loud, on camera. Germany went first, and hit hardest. The Defence Minister, one of Europe's most senior military officials, the same government whose chancellor had stood beside Carney on that Arctic base just 5 days earlier, posed the question directly. What exactly does Washington expect a handful of European frigates to accomplish that the most powerful navy on Earth cannot? This is not our war. We did not start it. That is not diplomacy. That is a line in the sand. A spokesperson for the German chancellor added that the conflict has no connection to NATO and is not NATO's responsibility. It did not stop there. Japan's prime minister announced there are no plans to deploy ships. Australia declined flatly. Italy's foreign minister said any expansion of operations should not happen. The European Union's top foreign policy official said there is simply no appetite, not considering it, not hesitating, no appetite. And then came the United Kingdom, the very country where Canada's Prime Minister had been sitting that same Monday morning. Standing at the same podium where he and Carney had just wrapped up their meeting, the British Prime Minister told reporters that Britain will not be drawn into a wider conflict. He said explicitly, this will not be a NATO mission. Germany said no. Japan said no. Australia said no. Italy said no. The EU said no. And the United Kingdom, while hosting our Prime Minister, said no. Every single one. Now here is the detail that turns humiliating into devastating. Reuters has reported that the U.S. Navy itself has been turning down near-daily requests from the shipping industry to escort vessels through the strait. The risk, according to those reports, is considered too high. Washington is demanding allied navies enter waters its own military considers too dangerous to operate in. That is not a strategy. That is not leadership. That is the worst possible position, unwilling to act yourself, threatening everyone else for not acting for you. Meanwhile, Canada's Prime Minister spent that same week doing the opposite of demanding. He showed up in Norway, training alongside allied forces, in Oslo, deepening defense partnerships with 5 Nordic nations, in London, sitting with the British Prime Minister and aligning on diplomacy, cooperation, and protecting global stability, not through threats, but through trust. Denmark's Prime Minister publicly thanked Carney for Canada's leadership. Iceland's Prime Minister said there is a void in global leadership right now, and Canada has been filling it. One leader demanded obedience and received silence. Another showed up, stood beside his allies, and was thanked by name. Now, to be fair, because this matters, the Strait of Hormuz does need to be reopened. 1/5 of the world's oil being blocked hurts families everywhere, including here in Canada. Prices above $100 a barrel are not abstract. They are felt at the pump, at the grocery store, in heating bills. But the question was never whether the strait should reopen. Of course it should. The question is whether a government that launched operations without consulting a single partner has the moral authority to demand those partners send their people into the wreckage. And here is what cannot be walked back. Every refusal this week is on the public record. Germany's position is documented. Japan's rejection is official. Australia's refusal is confirmed. Britain's Prime Minister said on camera, "This will not be a NATO mission." And Canada's Prime Minister was standing in Downing Street when he said it. Every defense agreement signed in Norway has a timeline and a budget. Every partnership deepened in Oslo is now permanent. Every ally that said no to Washington took a step closer to Canada. Alliances don't wait. Trust doesn't wait. And the words, "This is not our war," do not disappear when the news cycle moves on. One leader demanded obedience and received nothing. Another showed up, stood with his allies, and was thanked by name. That is the difference.